Now, what the fuck happened there? You know, it's supposed to automatically open. You know, not supposed to have to click buttons. Just supposed to automatically work, just like that. I'm gonna blame somebody else. I don't know who to blame because I'm the only one in studio right now, but I want to blame somebody else. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Crucible. I'm your host, Andrew Wilson. Tonight, we have a fantastic debate in store for you between Sinthe, our in-house left-wing debater, and Fabian Liberty, also known as Scott. You can find him. We have links to his Discord inside of our channel. We've always had an open Discord back and forth. His community is always welcome to the Crucible and vice versa. We like having these rotten ANCAPs around, even though they incessantly argue with the superiority of Christian nationalists. We'll still let them do that from time to time. Now, before we get the show started, remember that you have to listen to Hypnotoad. Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff you're supposed to do. You can donate tonight if you choose through YouTube. Remember that they take 30% of our revenue. You can become a channel member if you like as well. We'd appreciate it if you did. Up at the top, you'll see a link that goes to Streamlabs, and you can donate through that as well. We expect a full contact debate tonight. Neither one of these guys are amateurs when it comes to debating. So, you know, I don't know how much moderation is even going to be required, but there may be a significant amount. I have no idea where this is going to go. Blood sports all the way, or maybe something a little more reasonable. We'll find out momentarily.
Yeah, I finally forced myself to take a picture.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this fine evening. Before we get started, I'm going to let both of our debaters shout out their channels, just briefly give an overview of what they're about. Go ahead, starting with you, Fabian Liberty.
Yeah, so I'm Scott from Fabian Liberty. We're an anarcho-capitalist duo stream. We do politics, debates, news analysis, the occasional panel, all that fun stuff. I last night I did a debate panel, and the debate panel like Mini just becomes me educating people on economics and what anarcho-capitalism is. And it was like, I don't know, like 3:00 in the morning. And I was just like, Andrew, please, I need a good debate opponent. I need someone that actually like fucking challenges me. This is getting boring. Like, can you hook me up? He hit me up today and was like, yes, I have somebody. Sinthe, I've not debated you. I was recalcitrant in wanting to debate you at a certain time because you were such an asshole to me on Thanksgiving. It was like screaming about the non-aggression principle and the eating of pork when I just wanted to say hi on Thanksgiving. I was like, fuck this cat. But I was like, no, Sinthe's a good debater. He's one of the few that I respect on the left for actually being able to hold up their shit. So, you know, slap together a few quick arguments a few hours before stream and it should be fun.
All right. Thank you so much for that opening. By the way, you can find my new flannel wear line in the dumpster behind JC Penney. For anybody who was wondering, Sinthe, go ahead, tell everybody where they can find you and a little bit about what you're about.
Sure. So I'm the left-wing in-house debater here on the Crucible. You can find me here on the Crucible usually, but every once in a while, maybe like once or twice per year, I'll upload something on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sinthe, SINTHE. I need to get that subscriber count up just by a little bit, Andrew did everything he could to slap this debate together last minute. I think he's trying his best to make this channel run. He's putting a lot of effort in, and I really appreciate it. So you'll have to forgive me for not having an opening, having an opening statement either. That's it.
Sinthe said, or 2.2 acres and a bear for $2 says, does Sinthe work a regular job? He does work a regular job.
I'm a web developer.
Now, all this aside, tomorrow, Posh versus Adam Green, right here on the Crucible. There's a large debate coming up with Sinthe shortly, too. I'm not going to announce it yet, but it's right around the corner. Fabian Liberty, fuck that. I'm not hooking him up with nothing. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Let's see how it is.
All right. Fabian, as you are the challenger, we're going to let you open first. Go ahead.
Yeah, so ownership of firearms is a human right. From the libertarian perspective, sure, guns are private property, but there's something more fundamental here. Guns are a force multiplier in self-defense. The fact is best demonstrated by a historical understanding of gun culture in the American South. Following the Civil War, many women were left with no husbands to defend their homes from the often exaggerated menace of the carpetbagger. Left with a corrupt and vindictive Union Army for policing, some of whom just finished raping and pillaging in Sherman's March to the Sea, it was the armed women who were able to protect their homes from looters and keep their families safe. So why do we have the Second Amendment? Our founding fathers enshrined the Second Amendment in 1788 not to protect women from the would-be ravishes of home invaders, but to fight a tyrannical government. There is no argument that any and all federal gun control is against the Constitution. If someone is a proponent of some vague social contract, but pro-federal gun control, we should dismiss them as liars and charlatans because they refuse to honor the explicit contract that justifies their supposed government. If they can't honor the signed contract, why would they ever honor the social one? Yet, I'm sure my opponent wants to ground this in the observable data that the conclusion that, quote, reasonable gun control will lead to less death. Isn't it okay to sacrifice some freedom, some of your liberty to ensure that less people die? Well, no. I see no need to engage with the pseudoscientific garbage that are the studies that purport state gun control saves lives. Even if I were inclined to limit human freedom, spit in the face of history and trust the state to never corrupt and protect me from the bad men, the data doesn't support their position at all. But I have this study showing gun control in 1994 led to less violent crime. Cool. Correlation of reducing lead intake and drops in violent crime in the Western world are not evidence of successful gun control. But I have this study that compares this country with another with different demographics, different culture, different socioeconomic status, different economics. Cool. That tells me nothing. But I have a study comparing two states. The same principle applies. But I have this study showing increases in successful suicides in areas with less gun control. Never mind that this state also has more fentanyl overdoses and a myriad of things that could explain the differences. No, their studies done by public health experts are trash. But the real reason it doesn't work is because other nearby states funnel guns in. If only we could get rid of guns everywhere, we wouldn't have this problem. This is the same logic of the war on drugs, a totalitarian government trying to fix a problem by busting down doors, increasing violence in communities, putting a quarter of the world's population in prison, creating a lucrative black market, increasing sex trafficking, overdoses, and much, much more. The big difference between the war on drugs and reasonable gun control, instead of good people not being able to have a joint on their porch after a hard day of work, they can't defend their family from rapists. Reasonable gun control is anything but reasonable. It is an evil position that begs we disarm ourselves from murderers, home invaders, and everyone else who doesn't work for the government.
Well, I appreciate that opening statement. I'm kind of biased on this one, I'm not going to lie, but I'm still going to give unbiased moderation because that's what I do. I did notice, though, that you had to throw in the joint smoking, fucking dope fiends always on the Crucible. Go ahead, Synth. You're up.
Sure. So I think it's an interesting approach that Fabian went with, is to try to attack the veracity of the studies. Most of the attacks that he just levied at the studies were things like methodological flaws that wouldn't actually apply to most of the studies that I use on this, because they're all matching studies. So they find places which control for all of the factors that Fabian's talking about, such as, for example, rate of violent crime generally and things like this, right? Fentanyl overdoses, such and such, right? And what we actually see is that according to things like Donahue 2019, relative to synthetic controls, the right to carry laws have a 15% higher overall increase in violent crime 10 years after the adoption. In the case of Scheel and others, in 2020, Bayesian modeling shows that 7 years after implementing a right to carry law, firearm homicides specifically increased by 2%. In the case of Scheel, that same Scheel study, it says that as 7 years after implementing a standard ground law, firearm homicides increased by 5%. And in Siegel and others, 2019, differences shows that concealed carry increases violent crime as well. Not specifically gun crime, violent crime overall. So in the case of the studies we have on the United States, it's relatively one-sided. The data is just sort of a blowout for the position that it's more effective. But that's not really the topic that Fabian really cares about. If it was the case that I gave Fabian absolute proof, if absolute proof from God came down and revealed itself to Fabian that it was actually bad to have guns in society in the same way that it's bad to have crack, cocaine, or heroin in society, Fabian would still say people should be able to own it, just like he does for crack, cocaine, and heroin. In the case of gun control overall, it is on a utilitarian basis better. That's the reason I changed my mind from being very pro-gun. As proof of this, I still have the gun that I bought while I was pro-gun, and changed it over to being anti-gun, broadly. Fabian's core is not the consequences. He doesn't really care about those, as evidenced by his position on drug usage. Fabian really cares about, at the core of it, whether or not somebody's rights are being violated, and he views somebody's rights to buy and purchase anything in a voluntary transaction as fundamentally a human right across the board.
The floor is open, gentlemen.
Well, you know what, Synth, I will agree with you on one position. If God himself came down to prove that gun control, federal gun control, reduced overall deaths, I would still disagree with God. Yeah, I don't care about the consequences. I care about fundamental human rights. The only reason I went into that is because obviously I am dealing with someone that, entire moral framework is based upon, subjective preference and, the consequences and the way that we measure them. But again, I've yet to see one. Maybe you can show me one in this debate. A study that actually does anything other than establish a historical fact that at one point in time there weren't gun control laws, and this was the crime rate, and then at another point in time there were gun control laws, and this was the crime rate.
Here's Donahue 2019 if you'd like.
Can we open Sci-Hub on stream? I think we can. I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, we can also open it. You can also just open it in your tab, right?
All right. Go
but
ahead.
The core of it, the real disagreement here is going to come down to the moral principles, right?
So right off the bat, looking at your study, which, I'm not going to give you trash for like not sharing studies beforehand because we slapped this together a couple of hours ago, right? So
yeah,
I can't be like, Synth didn't give me the study beforehand. It's like, we didn't plan this. But right off the beginning, I open it up and the first thing I see is that the study is designed to be a refutation of Dr. John Lott. Right. So like if I'm trying to find I automatically can assume kind of like what the bias of this study is to attempt to go after, crime research that's being done.
Well, yeah, that's how we do science. We do falsification of other hypotheses. It's not the case that there's a bias or an issue with the study because of that. So long as there's no methodological flaw in the study, then the study's fine to use. Every single study is going to be trying to falsify a hypothesis. What we do when we have studies, That's the basic approach, right?
That's not how you write your fucking opening fucking abstract, or sorry, your introduction, to be like, this is why this guy's wrong, right? You go after a claim.
Plenty
when
of
you
studies
start
do that.
naming. Yeah, plenty of bias studies do that, right? Like if this shouldn't
No,
pass
this is
muster
like
for
the norm in
publication when it's
studies.
designed. No, it's not a fucking journalistic article, right? To attack the claim of someone else. If you want to attack the claim, that's fine. But when you start
That's how
saying
science works. You attack
quote,
hypotheses.
the more guns, less crime hypothesis, originally articulated by John Lott and David Mustard, 1997, claim this, right? Like, obviously, they're attacking their hypothesis, obviously. But naming this specific study is obviously designed to have a certain bias there. It's designed to go at, yes, it is.
It's just
If
how
you
we do science. We just falsify
That's not
hypotheses.
how we do
This is
science.
just-
That's
yes, it is.
no, you're full of shit and you're lying right off the bat. You know that
No,
that's
I'm
not how
not.
most.
I
that's
promise
not
you,
how-
Fabian, this is not
Okay, if
uncommon.
we
There's not a
pull up-
bias in the study because they're trying to
if we-
falsify a hypothesis. This is normal.
When you start naming other people's research and naming articles right in the very beginning of your introduction, as opposed to just naming a claim, right? Like, you can see already that there is a certain kind of undertone of a bias there. But
No,
that's
this is like
fine.
extremely common. I don't even know why
It's
this
not.
is the route you're attacking because of just how incredibly common it is. In fact, I bet if I just open up Read Random some of the other studies I have, I wouldn't be shocked if they're also mentioning other studies in the beginning because of the fact that, like, this is how science works. You take somebody else's hypothesis, you say, I think this hypothesis is false. Here is some evidence that if the hypothesis was true, would be more likely. Let's see if it happens. It doesn't happen. Therefore,
You're not
the
engaged.
hypothesis is likely
It's
to be
okay.
true.
You're not engaging with what I'm saying. You're engaging
How am
with
I not
what science
engaging?
is, which is what I don't dismiss the idea that you attack hypothesis, but that's okay. We'll just agree
that-
to disagree
what you're talking
that there
about
is
is
a
I'm
bias
saying-
that you can see right in the beginning.
They're saying they're just saying the more gun, less crime hypothesis, originally articulated by John Lott and David Mustard, claimed that RTC laws decrease violent crime.
Right. They're going after a specific article. That's fine. But when you when you're giving me a piece of research to say, like, here's this piece of research that proves a claim, and instead what you're sending me is a piece of research that is designed to specifically attack one researcher's hypothesis, I'm saying, yeah, that is like, I understand that's how we do science. You're trying to laugh and meme instead of taking this seriously.
I'm not memeing. I'm just like the
you
complaint is
are.
like what's the issue with
Look,
it, right? What's the issue with doing that?
I've already laid it out. I understand. I don't know. Like, you're trying to laugh it off and dismiss
Okay.
it as a meme, as
Hold on, Fabian.
opposed to showing that
Let's
the
think about it like this,
research.
right?
No. We're
'Cause
not.
we're
We're
having
not
a
going
dispute
to.
on these.
Guys, we got to go one at a time. You guys are overlapping to the point. I'll
Go
let
ahead,
some of that
Sid.
go on, but we got to have some coherency here. Go ahead.
Sure. So what I'm saying, Fabian, is just that when it comes to the study, right? If we want to say there's an issue with it, right? Since we're clearly disputing whether or not that is an issue with the study, if you just give me why you think that means the study is less likely to be accurate, right? Why is it that they are attacking a specific author's hypothesis causes the study to be more likely to be inaccurate? Then I think that's a conversation that's possible to have. But it just almost seems like you have an issue with it in principle, right? Which I don't think there's an issue with.
I don't have a very big issue. I'm just saying that I don't have time to go through the entire study. I open up the first study that you give me, and the first study that you give me is an attack is peer review, which is fine, right? Like that process is fine. But the first study that you give me is to try and debunk a claim from Dr. John Lott, and it seems that is the entire basis of it. And so, yeah, obviously that there is going to be a bias from the researchers if they're attempting, like, if their research is not about purporting a positive claim, but the research is about trying to disprove this specific claim. That is what they are trying to find, whether or not that is true.
You'd want them to not try
And
to
he's a
prove
very
positive claim to
controversial figure within gun research.
You
right?
would never want to study to prove a positive claim. You want it to try to falsify a positive claim.
Well, that's stupid. You want both.
No, you cannot use a study to prove a positive claim, right? That's just. Have you heard of Hume's problem with induction?
Okay, you're not trying to prove a positive claim, right? I get what you're saying. You're trying to disprove a hypothesis. You're trying to create a null hypothesis.
Exactly, yeah.
Fair enough.
Rabbit hole.
But that's not
don't
what I'm
care,
talking about,
don't
right?
care,
Like,
move it
I'm
back
talking
to
about.
control.
I'm talking about one something is regardless. What I'm saying is the first fucking study you give me is like, let's debunk this controversial gun researcher. I don't have time to go through the whole study, but let's give it a quick overview. So what is the claim of the study? The claim of the study is that the 1997 study, More Guns, Less Crime, is they're peer reviewing this and finding it to be false, presumably, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the claim from his More Guns, Less Crime, which I think is a hypothesis
Just the right
of a book,
to carry,
not a
the
study,
right to carry
right?
decreases violent crime.
Is this a study of his, or is this his book, More Guns, Less Crime?
More Guns, Less Crime is like the hypothesis. It's just what
Okay.
they're calling it.
Okay.
So the core of the methodology used is to use synthetic controls on a state by state basis. Synthetic,
Mhm.
right, as in like matching studies, as in they find states with similar enough factors which are worth controlling for, right, the ones you name. And then what they do is they just compare. One of these states did issue the guns, did issue right to carry. One of them didn't. What is the impact on violent crime? And so the hypothesis from John Lott ends up being, like, as the name More Guns, Less Crime implies, the right to carry laws will decrease violent crime. What this study shows is that actually the hypothesis ends up being wrong because of the fact that
how does it show this?
It shows this by using a matching study methodology, right? So it's using the synthetic controls on a state by state basis.
Okay, how does it show that? Like, I mean, that's fine, but like, explain the process by which they prove that that they're not just establishing a historical fact, right? How are they controlling for all variables in, like, it's a social
They don't
science
control
that
for
already
every
has an issue,
single.
right?
Yeah,
Right.
they don't control for every single possible variable. They control
but
for the
you
ones
wanna
that
find
are posited to be
statistically significant,
likely
right.
to, that are posited to be influencing. So if somebody posits that such and such variable is influencing, right, the more and more variables that you have to posit, the less likely it is that your claim is true. So a lot of variables are posited as influencing the outcomes here. And because of that, the matching studies, what they do is they find states that are similar in by virtue of those variables, right, but are different just by virtue of right to carry laws, right?
Okay.
And then what they do is they look at violent crimes before and after.
I'm sorry to cut in, but I do want to make this clear, because these studies were not shared beforehand. There's no way for it to be fair for Fabian to be intricately familiar with this one. So if you guys,
to be fair,
hang on this,
I do want to be fair for just a moment, right? Like, I brought my opening I brought my opening statement, right, that I wrote just before this, and I said, but I have a study comparing two states and said that the same principle applies, right? So I already attacked this form of research and the idea that we compare two states that are supposedly similar, but have, and the idea is that the study is able to control for demographics, it's able to control for culture, it's able to control for economic similarities, it's able to control for socioeconomic status. And the only substantive difference, let's say, from Georgia and Alabama is that during this period of time, Georgia had like right to carry laws and Alabama didn't, or vice versa, or whatever. Right? Like,
it doesn't just
now,
look at two
I'm
states.
not able.
Right?
I'm not able to
plurality of
actually
states.
look at the right. Sure. I'm okay. That's fine. I'm not able to adequately go through.
You can't attack it though, and I have to give
No, for sure.
to respond if you do. You know what I mean? What
No.
I know you're not intricately familiar with the study, so I
it's 50 pages, so it's not like I can do like a quick review of the methodology.
Be a good idea to move off of it and into your moral arguments or things like this, so that it was that way you weren't hit over the head with something there's no way you could have foreknowledge
right
of.
But I can still attack the idea, right, which is that we attempt to control for all of these variables, but it's not the same thing as a hard science in a laboratory. Like, what we're talking about is best guesses, right? Like, you can do something in a laboratory experiment where you can isolate variables, right? You can add one chemical compound to another chemical compound, see how it reacts, and isolate every possible variable, and do this over and over again. When you're talking about social sciences, you attempt to control variables and you get a good guess, right? So maybe this study shows an 88% chance or a 92% chance. We don't really know what that percentage is. We attempt to see that the other variables that are not controlled for, that we don't know, right, is not statistically significant, and we have enough of the variables. But we also really don't know, because you're not able to isolate in time, you're not able to isolate the human condition, the brain, all of the things that go into this. So sure, I will say that without being able to adequately dig into your study, that maybe your study shows a high likelihood that certain forms of gun control reduce violent crime or death overall under certain conditions, which are those that we live in. It does nothing to attack to suggest that we should have gun control unless you are, a subjectivist, a consequentialist of some sort.
I'm a realist consequentialist.
Okay, fair enough. Right. But now, like, please respond to that.
Sure. Yeah. In short, then the issues you're levying at the studies would actually also be ones that would apply to the lab experiments as well. You can control for more factors in a lab experiment, but there are always possible factors that might have been influencing that you couldn't control for. Labs are better at that, I agree, but the same critique would apply to both. You can't know for sure, right? But you can't really know anything for sure, right? You can only have good evidence of it. In the case of the study, if it shows that there's a 92% likelihood that if all of the studies seem to show, right, that there's a 92% likelihood, and if you could do a meta-analysis and it were to show that, right, then what we'd see is that it's that 92% likelihood is a good reason, right, to believe that there's a 92% likelihood. You don't have to know it.
We both know that it's not all the studies have a 92, right? Like there are meta-analyses.
Yeah, the meta-analyses overall tend to show that tend to show like the same thing that the study does, right? Which is that guns are negatively impactful in society on aggregate, right?
Right, but
if we
when
talk
you start
about
combining
the advantages that you're talking, just a second. If you talk about the advantages that you were mentioning, right, to guns, they're going to be things that, like, I think the arguments on principle, right, the arguments about our ethical differences are the ones where we'll actually have the meat of it, right? You haven't been able to read the study. Sure. It's not fair for me to like try to get you to read the study live on stream. It's 50 pages or whatever, right? But there are in fact
I still have
that,
doubts. When you say 92% and you talk about meta-analysis, right? Like, just a quick aside, like, an overwhelming majority of the science told us that the vaccine was safe and effective for everybody too, right? Like, that's not really an argument that something is true. That's just an argument that most people say that something is true.
We're on YouTube.
Yeah, we're on YouTube. I guess we can't talk about that, right? I'll say I disagree with it, right?
Florida, if the Florida Attorney General says that they don't, that 18 to 39, they don't recommend, I think that we're now in a safe position to say certain things.
Okay.
Not on YouTube.
Yeah. All right, fair enough.
I don't want to get the channel banned, right?
All right, fair enough. I'm just saying.
I'll say the science did not say that.
Argument of popularity is like fucking.
I'll say the science didn't say that initially, right? Meta-analyses did not say that initially. They didn't say that everyone it was okay, right? They said that the vast majority of the population was okay, and it was.
I don't know what science you were reading.
Okay, I'll send you those studies too. But the principles, the ethical arguments, are where the real meat of this lies, right? That's where the matter lies. If it's the case, right, that the data was different on the impacts and the consequences, I would flop my position back to what it used to be, right, before I had seen the data. If it was the case that the data is like I'm saying it is, right, which I think there's very strong evidence to indicate that, you would not flop your position because there's a difference in the ethical matters, right? Under your position, you would say, just by virtue of the fact that somebody wants to be able to buy it and it can be bought in a voluntary transaction, regardless of the impacts, people should be able to have it.
Yes, I would say that everyone has gun rights, that it's a fundamental human right. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. Would you say it's also true of
nuclear weapons?
Yes, I support individual private property owners having nuclear weapons.
Okay, and do you agree?
I also support just to make it even more radical. I think wife beaters that have served their time in prison deserve gun rights too. Everyone deserves gun rights. Period. Okay,
and you also think this applies to nuclear weapons. So you would say that like the even though there's an obvious potential negative impact, the expected utility there is very, very, very low. It's very the amount of fun you get from saying you own a nuclear weapon cannot possibly outweigh the risk. That even if it's like 1% of somebody.
That's your opinion. I would disagree. I would say it would be a positive for the world and the consequences.
You would say it's a positive for the world for more people to have nuclear weapons?
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt.
So you think that
but this is the problem with consequentialism is that you get to do your own like a level of analysis and guesses and subjective things.
We can use Bayesian analysis. We can both use Bayesian analysis, right? If you just give me your reasons why, then we could talk about the evidence. I don't think there's good evidence to believe the nuclear proliferation, and historically, and then on the level of nation states, has led to good consequences. It seems like that's led to bad consequences. It seems like nuclear proliferation, the existential risk, right, of one person launching a nuke and killing a city is sufficient, right, to justify it not being the case that everyone deserves it. That everyone deserves to have nukes in their basement or something, right? With their own nuclear missile silo.
I never said everyone deserves to have nukes in their basement.
Just people who can afford
private property owners, right? Just people that can afford them.
So everyone deserves to if they can afford them. Agreed?
Yeah, if you can afford nuclear weapons, you deserve to have the right to have nuclear weapons, and that would be a better and safer world.
Okay, so you think a world in which more people have nuclear weapons is a better and safer world? Do you think that if somebody launches their do you think that there's what percentage chance would you rate there of being of somebody who's like relatively wacky owning a nuclear weapon and then launching it and like killing a city of people? What percentage chance would you give that?
I mean, I'm not going to engage in like a weird percentage chance of a future that is radically different in terms of government organization and culture and all of these. How do I imagine a world where there is no state control of nuclear weapons? Do you have any idea how many factors would have to be different for that world to exist?
Do you think that it's above zero?
It's above zero? Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
it's probably like it's above zero now, right? Like, are we not?
I don't think.
Are we not going after like and enticing Russia right now? Do you think?
Hold on, Fabian. You're going everywhere. You're going everywhere. Yeah, I think it's bad, right? I think nuclear proliferation is bad on the level of nation states as well. I think it'd be really bad if every random idiot could have a nuclear weapon. If we're saying there's a non-zero chance of that happening. Everyone who can afford it, right? So anyone who can afford it, there's a lot of wacky people with lots of money, a lot of very immoral people with lots of money as well, right? They might not be so wacky and irrational. They might just want to do bad things because of some kind of motivation they have. Being able to hold a city hostage, it'd be really hard to negotiate with people like that, right? They're one person and they can destroy entire cities with their nuclear weapons. That seems like an issue to me. If it's the case that we're saying that take some random example of a person, right? If we're saying that like any random person, right, there's a 0.5% chance that they just go unhinged and they use their nuclear weapons to destroy an entire city. Or like there's a 0.5% chance that they'll also have like latent schizophrenia. They end up going schizophrenic and launching their nukes, right? Because there's just a lot of people that have these.
Right. Off of like random percentile numbers that you're throwing out.
I'm giving it a very, very, very low percent chance. I think there's more people who have, there's more than 0.5% of the population who has schizophrenia.
Yeah, I don't care about your percentage of this percentage.
I don't care that you don't care, right? I
go wacky. Like you're just making up shit. Like you're just saying random numbers about like this weird utilitarian calculus. I don't know the exact percentage of the population that has schizophrenia. I also don't know what percentage of the population would have schizophrenia in a world without a state. I don't know what percentage of those people would be taken care of adequately. I don't know what a world would look like in a free market capitalist system.
I don't think that free market anarcho-capitalism is going to solve heritable mental illnesses, right? That seems ridiculous. In the case of schizophrenia, right, I'm giving you a low ball, right? That's why I said 0.5%, assuming a very low ball compared to the numbers of the population, which I think that's about half of the actual number. I think it's about 1% of the population has schizophrenia. If we're going with a low ball, we could even go 0.1% if you want, right? And the math still works out. 0.1% chance over a large group of people having nuclear weapons. Chance of one of them firing it is almost guaranteed. The amount of fun that they gain, right, from having those nuclear weapons will not nearly outweigh the catastrophic risks of nuking New York and killing millions of people, right? Or nuking wherever you live that you care about.
Your claim doesn't make any sense because nukes aren't going away, and we've already had cities where atomic bombs were dropped, right? The claim, what you're doing is you're saying
Nagasaki, right? But these were early atomic bombs.
No.
These are not the atomic bombs we have today.
Okay, not relevant. Not relevant.
Super relevant.
What? No, it's not relevant. What I'm saying is that talking about the size of the bomb is somehow relevant. It's just not to the situation. What you're talking about is you're saying nukes are devastating weapons, therefore we shouldn't have nukes. Except the reality of the world that we live in is that we do have nukes and that we can't get rid of nukes. It's a fantasy utopic vision that we can get rid of nukes. And so what you're sneaking into the question is, what you're sneaking into the argument without actually addressing is the idea that you believe it is better that nation states have nukes and that the market and that people do not have nukes. That is the real argument that you are making without addressing.
So the argument that we can't get rid of nukes is irrelevant here. So long as we can reduce the amount of nukes, that's sufficient for my argument to work. And we can reduce the amount of nukes because we've done that.
How does that make any sense?
Stop. Since 1986.
Back up your claim.
Stop. Hold on. You're interrupting me. I let you talk for like the whole time there. You gish gallop out like 80 points, right? Let me respond to all of them.
I didn't gish gallop 80 points. You're exaggerating.
Hold on. I am obviously I'm exaggerating. Yeah, it's 80 points. Obviously.
Hang on. Let Sinthe respond. Go ahead, Sinthe.
Sure. So since 1986, nuclear proliferation has gone down drastically. The global nuclear arsenal has gone from a tremendous amount of weapons to about 25% of what it once was. So we can certainly reduce the number of nukes. If we reduce the number of nukes, then that gamble, that risk, that dice roll chance becomes less likely. If you want me to substantiate the claim that we've reduced the number of nukes, very easy, just go look up global nuclear arsenal and look up any of the graphs and you'll see.
Yeah, it's a bullshit irrelevant point. I'm asking you to substantiate the claim that a reduction in the overall number of nukes without actually reducing the like if we have enough nukes, right, to destroy the world, what is it, like 5 times over? Then like what is the substantive difference in reducing the overall number of nukes? And how does that change, which is your claim? It changes the likelihood of a crazy nation state or individual launching nukes if all of the nations that have nukes still have nukes. Yes, some specific
You want me to respond to the first point?
Some specific small nation states have given up nukes, of which they didn't have the capacity to maintain without other nation states that haven't given up their nukes coming in and controlling those. So you say it's good that we reduce the overall number of nukes. How does that make any fucking difference?
Okay, so that's point 3. I'll go with point 1 first. So in the case of the reason why nuclear deproliferation actually does in fact cause less likelihood of nuclear catastrophe or some kind of existential threat from nuclear weapons, is not just the case that it's the nuclear stockpile has gone down, the nuclear arsenal has gone down. The number of agents with nuclear weapons, as in different state actors with nuclear weapons, has also gone down. Things like China, for example, they've only got about 300 nukes. It's not the case that every single country has enough to destroy the world 5 times over. It's just the US and Russia in particular, right, that have enough to do the tremendous existential damage with nuclear weapons. If it's the case that other countries have smaller amounts of weapons and we reduce those amount of weapons, they can do even less damage with them. The overall nuclear stockpile has gone down drastically. The fact that like the U.S. and Russia are just have enough nukes to destroy the entire world is irrelevant. There's not even a close second place to the U.S., right, when it comes to nuclear weapons. If we're saying that the fact that like what you're trying to get me to substantiate is just the idea that like more nuclear weapons leads to more risk of nuclear war. As long as more agents have nuclear weapons, then it does lead to more chance of nuclear war. And if more agents have more weapons, it leads to the chance of more damaging nuclear war if it does happen. So the reduction in nuclear weapons overall does in fact lead to a reduction in the potential damages, as well as the reduction in agents is going to lead to the reduction in the chance of any damage at all occurring.
Right. So I already addressed all of that, and you didn't like, the only thing you gave was a cope, right? Which is, I specifically said, and you were like, I'll address the first one, but not the second one. But the second one automatically showed the problem with your argument, which is a reduction in the agents who own nuclear weapons. And I said that yes, there have been some agents, some nation states that have given up their nuclear weapons, but they didn't have the means to maintain those nuclear stockpiles to begin with without other agents who have nuclear weapons helping them run them. So, for example, Ukraine is a great example. They gave up their nuclear weapons. I don't know that it was necessarily all that good for Ukraine, but nevertheless, right? Like maybe if they had their nukes and they had allowed the US to come in, it would have been a better situation. Who fucking knows, right? This is more just kind of like, I believe with my crystal ball bullshit. But nevertheless, the Ukraine didn't have the capacity to maintain their own nuclear weapons. You want to talk about your first
point before you move on to another one? Right. So you're saying that you said that I didn't respond to your second point, right? I did. You just forgot what the response was. So I didn't say I wasn't going to respond to it.
I didn't forget anything.
I'm going to go with the first one first. Hold on. Stop. So if it's the case, right, that the agents reduced, none of the things that you just said have anything to do with that argument, right? The fact that there are other reasons why the fact that there are other reasons, like not being able to hold on to their nuclear weapons, right, why it's reduced is irrelevant to the question of if the number of agents reduces, then there's less of a chance of nuclear war. Your analogy or like your story about Ukraine is irrelevant to that question. All you're doing is saying there's an explanation for why it reduced. You're not saying anything about the reduction being good or bad. It's irrelevant entirely. It's just a cope.
Okay, so again, this is, I was hoping that you would be good faith for this debate. And it appears that what you're going to do is try and obfuscate the entire time. So like, I don't know how.
Do you want to just quit the meta and just talk about the subject?
Right. Like we can, but again, like you're making a belief that you're stating this belief that if we have a reduction in agents, it necessarily must follow that less agents reduces the likelihood of a nuclear war. This is just a belief. You have no way to ground that in any way, shape, or form. Number one. Number two, you're
you want to go with number one
around
first, or you want to go to you want to do the gish galloping thing every single time you respond?
Right.
You want to go number
I'm
one
responding
first?
to multiple statements that you had. And each time you accuse me of gish galloping, it's because I defeat your pivot that you're going to do in my second statement, because I can see some of the argumentation that's coming forward. So number one, you have a belief that you have yet to substantiate, that a reduction in actors necessarily means it is less likely, or sorry, that it is true, that it necessarily must follow that we're less likely to have nuclear war. You can't substantiate that. It's you trying to tell the future. If it's just the United States and Russia that have nukes, right, and everyone else on the planet gets rid of their nukes, you can't prove that it is true that that's less likely to have nuclear war. It could be more likely. You don't fucking know. Second, multiple times I have said that, yes, there are nation states that have given up their nuclear weapons, but in these examples, these are people that would have needed foreign state actors to maintain their nuclear arsenal, at least for a large portion of time. And that is why I gave Ukraine as an example, because Ukraine had Russia's nuclear arsenal, or at least some portion of it, right? Now, obviously not all of it, but they would have needed to either have the United States or Russia involved in maintaining that stockpile and those facilities. And this would have likely led to certain tensions with the whichever opposing faction is there.
So I have no idea why you said the second response another time, right? Like the first time you said it, I already gave you the counter argument. The counter argument is it doesn't matter what the cause is. What we're talking about is not what causes a reduction in nuclear weapons. That's not even close to the conversation. We're talking about, does a reduction in nuclear weapons end up causing a reduction in nuclear war, right? And the argument for the first one is you're just a straw man, right? The position is not it deductively follows. The position is that it abductively follows, right? It abductively follows because it's very reasonable to assume that there is some percentage likelihood of a nuclear war happening per agent, right? It's a reasonable, obvious assumption that some people are going to end up being schizophrenic. That some people will end up being schizophrenic under your worldview, right? Your anarcho-capitalist society will not cure schizophrenia. That's ridiculous. If it's the case that some people are schizophrenic, then more people having weapons, you never know who's going to be the one who's schizophrenic. And I mean, you don't even want schizophrenic people to not be able to own nuclear weapons. You're okay with it, right? If it's the case that people who are extremely mentally ill out of nowhere begin to own nuclear weapons, right? Then those people might, you never know, start launching the nuclear weapons. And you're just not engaging with this at all, right? You can't know anything.
You're not
engaged in reality. You think it is.
You're not engaged in reality. You're engaged
I'm not the one arguing in favor of nuclear ownership.
That doesn't matter, right? Like you can meme on the position all you want, but what you're saying is there is some percentage where I'm more likely to be right, therefore I am right. You're rubbing a fucking crystal ball saying that you know something reasonably follows and therefore it must be true. That's not how reasoning works, right? You can't take a percentage chance and then say that it must follow. You can only say that it is more likely. And therefore you're engaged in some form of calculus. And that's fine that you believe that it's better because it's more likely to be right, but that doesn't mean that it is right. That doesn't mean that it is true.
If all you're saying is that, like, you can't know anything, if this is the core of your argument, then you don't have an argument. It's the case that all of the evidence and all the reasoning and all the things that we can abduct from that are reasonable principles, right? If all the things that are reasonable things we can abduct from the principles that we have, right? From the null hypothesis, from what any normal person would believe, are going to be things where nuclear war is more likely with more agents, right? That's a good reason to believe it. If all that you have is, it's possible that you're... No, there's no making shit up. It's obvious that some people are schizophrenic in society. This is obvious, right? So if it's the case that there's some chance of nuclear war happening per person, right, then this follows. If there's some chance of it happening, seems like a reasonable thing we can both assume. You saying, well, it's possible you're wrong. Yeah, I admit it's possible that under ANCAP society, magically, the ANCAP society is so good, it invents a new technology or something that cures schizophrenia. And then there's no chance of anyone ever using a nuclear weapon. And also it cures everyone's brains, so nobody ever goes haywire, has a stressed out day, or ever does anything irrational, or like goes crazy. Like, if you want to presuppose that's a possibility, sure, I agree it's a possibility. It's irrelevant to the discussion if there's some alternative possibility where your ANCAP society would allow everyone to own nuclear weapons and still work, right? It's irrelevant. What we're talking about is what's actually likely, what's reasonable in the real world, not what is technically possible and doesn't entail a logical contradiction.
Okay, so I think it's high time we move off of the whole nuclear issue, because it's too complicated of an issue, and you're too bad faith in order to engage in this, because you're just kind of pivoting and running away from the fact that you're positing. I'm running away,
but
many
you're
things.
moving off the topic.
Right.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, well, just real quick.
Okay,
You're positing this like mathematical calculus, and the things that you decide to put into this math equation is schizophrenia. Like, if we want to change the math equation, this is the problem with consequentialism. We just change what we fucking value, right? Like we can talk about whether or not individual actors are likely to be more crazy than nation states that go off and bomb people. We can talk about the issues of corruption in
Doesn't
government.
matter.
We can, yeah, exactly. It only
You're just
matters so
scalping.
long
That's
as we
irrelevant
do.
to the argument.
It is not irrelevant to the fucking argument that you set up this idea that less actors must necessarily follow, and you can't ground that claim in anything other than a percentage belief. It's stupid.
That's the part you take contention with, is that there will be
I
more
take contention
actors
with
who can own
all
nuclear
of your
weapons?
fucking pivots
Wait,
and your
hold on.
fucking math
There's
fucking
no
code.
pivot. There's no pivots, right? So the idea that what you take contention with is the number of actors will go up if we let everyone own nuclear weapons. Obviously, the number of actors is going to go up. There are people who can afford a nuclear weapon, right?
I
There are
didn't say
people who
that.
can
You're
afford
straw
that.
manning and memeing
You
again.
just
well,
you just
hang on,
did.
both of you,
No,
both
I
of you.
didn't. You're
Stop,
lying and
stop,
straw manning me over and over
my
again.
God.
This has got to get back to guns now at some point. So
Mhm.
can we tie this back into the actual debate topic? That would be swell. We've been on nukes now for 35 minutes. Can we go back to guns and gun control?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. So we don't want to engage in studies because, you know, I have a certain issue with the methodology and I don't have time to go through with them. The studies that he wants to purport, and it would be unfair if I did like the same thing, right? He would probably just be like, Dr. Lott's bad because, you know, he's controversial and he's been proven wrong by other people, or like some other researcher, et cetera. So we can stick to the moral claim, right? Your moral claim is based on the empirical idea, or the empirical evidence, I should say, that you believe is true, right? Because it's founded only on the belief, not the statement of like what is true. It's founded on the belief from evidence that gun control will reduce crime and will reduce deaths or reduce some things that you say are good. And mine is that the limiting of that freedom is wrong no matter what, but it also opens the doors to all kinds of abhorrent terrors that we are unable to defend ourselves from, such as a tyrannical government, or defend our homes, or, you know, defend our communities, etc.
That's a bad faith argument from Fabian. That's not at all what he cares about. If it was the case that it wasn't effective at defending against a tyrannical government, which it isn't, which is one of the reasons that I'm off of it, then he also still wouldn't care about the owner. He wouldn't care about people being able to own nuclear weapons. He does. It's not the case that he's supporting
That's
this.
not
because
true.
It's not. If I
Don't
told
tell
you
me
right
what
now,
I believe and then say
yeah,
that.
I'll ask you and you can correct me, right? So if it's the case that God came down from the heavens right now and said, actually, rifles aren't really that effective for defending against a tyrannical government, would you think it's okay to ban rifles?
So this is you misunderstanding libertarianism.
Can you give me a yes or no on that before you say I misunderstand?
Yeah, no, I'm
Can you
going
not
to
dodge the
explain why.
question?
Let
I'm
him
not dodging the-
respond, Sint. Let him respond.
Okay.
I've already answered that question earlier in the debate, right? Which is, I already said that if God himself came down and said that it led to more favorable outcomes, that I would still be against God, right? And since God is making himself present in the material world, and we can now prove that God exists, you know, I have some questions for God because I feel like there's a lot of crimes he has to answer for. That being said, I know that's going to fly well with the Christian audience here, but nevertheless, that being said, your misunderstanding is that libertarianism is as a moral philosophy is about what is unjustified. And I know that you've already had like argumentation ethics debates and things like that. So I know that you know that position, right? I know that you understand that there is a difference between what I care about as an individual, what I value, and how I engage in the world and what I value, and what I believe is justifiable and unjustifiable. That these are two separate positions. Now, the audience might not understand that, but if you want to accuse me of being bad faith and then misinterpret my belief, even though I know that you know that belief, it is in fact evidence. And if people don't believe that he knows that, just check out his debate with Liquid Zulu on argumentation ethics, right? Then we know that you're the one engaging in bad faith because you're telling me what I believe despite understanding my philosophy well enough to know that there are two separate things there by saying that I don't care. I would care, right? I would care that that was the outcome, and I would try and find ways around it, right? I would try and find ways to, as a community, to engage in like less guns, voluntary things of that nature, covenant communities, if I knew for a fact that getting guns out of the community reduced certain things. What I am talking about instead is about what is justifiable and unjustifiable. So no, I have just proven that you are the individual engaging in bad faith, or you've forgotten your debate with Liquid Zulu and what libertarian philosophy is.
What's ironic is you forgot this debate, right? You forgot seconds before you said that. You had said that it wasn't the case that you think it wasn't the case that was your position when I described. Then I relayed it back to you, and then you said it was your position, which is wild to me. You can just rewatch the debate later and you can see that in real time. If it's the
That's
case,
a lie.
what you're saying is there, you can rewatch it yourself. Maybe you just forgot, right? So
I
if
haven't
it's the
changed
case,
my stance. You lying
hold on,
sack of
bud.
shit.
Hold
stop
on.
telling me what I believe.
Can you stop interrupting
stop doing
constantly?
that.
Jesus Christ, Liquid Zulu, or the Fabian Liberty, right? You're all the same to me. So if it's the case
Better?
Racist.
That's true. I'm racist to ANCAPs. If it's the case, if it's the case, right, that you're saying like you don't really care if it's useful for defending against tyranny on a moral level, then the moral argument is what's relevant here, not your own preferences, right? You don't really care too much about that as like a social prescription level. If it was the case that I thought that they just looked bad or something, and I just chose to individually not buy guns or something, you wouldn't have an issue with that. The point is, you think there's a moral issue. That's what I just said.
My position.
You're not paying attention at all. I just told you that's not your position.
Right. You stated that I don't care, and now you're backtracking off of the position that I don't care. Now you're moving the goalpost to it wouldn't matter because of the idea of what I think is morally justifiable and unjustifiable. Right. And so if I think that something is morally unjustifiable, I'm not in favor of it being forced upon people. And that is what makes it morally unjustifiable. That doesn't mean that there aren't other positions of which I care, of which I would do
I'm not
more
talking
than just
about your
voluntarily
personal cares. I'm talking
individually
about your moral cares, right? I'm not talking about your personal
that's a
preferences.
nice moving of the goalpost, but don't
I
bullshit.
didn't move the goalpost. I explicitly stated this moments ago, right? You're an idiot. You're not paying attention at all.
All right,
so
all right. Stop. I want to fucking hear about guns at some point. Can we possibly get to guns if we're going to talk about the philosophy of why you have those stances? I'm okay with that too. But we keep getting caught up on so much nuance that I feel like we can't get anywhere with the conversation. So, Sinthe, I'm going to start with you, right? Go ahead.
The thing that me and Fabian Liberty disagree on, right? The core of this argument that Fabian Liberty is pretending is not the core of it, that he keeps trying to do everything he can to pettifog around, is I care about it because of the consequences. Fabian Liberty thinks that it's immoral to restrict people from being able to voluntarily do transactions. It doesn't matter what the transaction is with. Guns is one of those things. If it was the case, right, that guns were awful for society, like Fabian Liberty even had to admit earlier, it would still be the case that Fabian Liberty would be okay, right, on a moral level with people owning guns. I have to specify moral level every single time, despite the fact that it's implicit. See, you wouldn't be okay on a moral level with people owning guns? You think it would be immoral for them to own the guns?
Yeah. So if I had evidence, right,
yes
that
or no?
proved, will you shut up?
You're not going to answer the question.
I'm not dodging the fucking question. I'm not gonna let you try and frame everything like you tried to frame the conversation about schizophrenia. Like you try and frame things and then you demand a yes or no answer to your bad faith questions. What I'm trying to elucidate a complex thing here, which is that there is a difference between what I find morally justifiable and unjustifiable and what I think is morally good or morally right. Okay, these are not always when 100% and 100% congruence, right? The libertarian philosophy shows me, right? Argumentation ethics shows me that it is morally unjustifiable for you to use state power to stop people from having guns. That is a morally unjustifiable position, no matter what the consequences are.
That's what I just said. Okay? Right?
No, it is not what you just said.
It would be immoral.
That is not what you just said.
Can I finish the sentence?
Show you.
Stop. Before you show me anything, let me show you, okay?
Fuck your world up and show you for the bad faith liar that you are.
You have nothing to fuck my world up with, right? You know jack shit about the subject. If it's the case, right, that we're saying that you think it's immoral for me to prevent people from owning guns, right? It would be immoral for me to stop them no matter what the consequence is.
That's not true.
You don't think it would be immoral for me to stop people from owning guns? Like if I go
there
force
are
you
ways
to not own
to
your guns.
stop people. Okay, force is a different word.
You're
here.
just being so disingenuous, right?
I'm not being disingenuous. You're being disingenuous.
I'm not saying I'm convincing them. Fabian, nobody interpreted that as me saying I'm going to convince people to own guns less. They mean when I say I'm going to stop people from owning guns, people assume that means by force with the government, right? It's normal how normal people just talk, right?
Normal people don't just throw force, aggression, and violence as an assumption into everything. So again,
it is
my position that it is morally unjustifiable for you to use force, aggression, violence to stop people from doing voluntary transactions of private property, which includes guns. At the same time, Shut up and let me finish.
That's what I
other
said.
thing you're
What are you
not
talking
letting
about?
me. You keep fucking memeing because I hold another position.
Let him finish his thought process. And
That is not diametrically opposed. They work together. If it was true that I had found out that the nature of people owning guns led to all of these horrible outcomes, it is very likely that I would believe that despite it being morally unjustifiable to use force and aggression, I would voluntarily set up communities that separate, that uses voluntary association as a means of making sure that my community did not have these guns other than controlled mechanisms for defense, or et cetera, whatever way that the data showed in that regard. So I can do a consequential analysis of those things, right, that are within the category of not being proven to be morally unjustifiable as a means of what I care about. I value people's lives. I value community. I value a safe community. What I'm saying is that you using force to stop me from owning property is morally unjustifiable.
That's what I was saying. You think that
it's
using
not
force
okay.
to stop
You're going to
somebody from
pretend like I
engaging in
don't
a
have a
voluntary
point. All right.
You think that using force to prevent somebody from engaging in a voluntary transaction would be immoral to do. It would be unjustifiable. It'd be something that I cannot do, right? Under your society, you would like it to be the case that I don't do that. So if it's the case that that's the issue, then that is the issue. And constantly pretending that it's not that and trying to pedophague and talk about like, there's a difference between
you
what's
moving the
justifiable and what's morally
goalposts
good.
and me
Can you
calling
please
you out
stop?
for it is not me gish galloping.
I let you do you did gish gallop because you sprayed out like 80 points and I can't like finish a sentence with you without jumping back in. So if it's the case, right, that you think that in the case of weapons, it was the case they're bad for society on aggregate, you would still think, in spite of this, that I should not force somebody to not be able to engage in a voluntary transaction. I can't force somebody to not be able to sell guns, and I can't force someone to not possess guns. You apply this to nuclear weapons, you apply this to crack cocaine, you apply this to anything, right? Anything that can be transacted. If it was the case that somebody wanted to transact...
Third pivot, you're finally in my position.
What?
It's a third pivot, and you finally reached my position.
I have said this at least 4 times in the last 30 minutes of this debate. So if it's the case, right, that we're saying that in the case of the ownership of these weapons, right, no matter what the impact would be, there's not the justification for force. That is the core of our disagreement. It's the moral issue with if force is justified or not. I do think in the case of a weapon transaction or a heroin transaction or a crack cocaine transaction or a nuclear bomb or an anthrax transaction, all of these things are things that should be able to be prevented because they have the issues, right? I think if there's a core of it, right, if you have an argument for why we should care about never engaging in what you're calling force, right, never engaging in that without somebody else engaging in it first, only ever engaging in force if it's retaliatory, then I just want to know what's the reason. Yeah. What's the reason why we shouldn't? What is the reason, right? Meta-ethically, what is the core reason why you think that is a system worth ascribing to? Or is it just totally subjective and it's just an arbitrary position you've picked?
Well, I mean, like, I don't like, this is supposed to be a debate about gun control, so I'm not going to get into argumentation ethics. I feel like you already have engaged with this. You understand why I believe that it is an objective opinion that one cannot advocate aggression towards another person. I think we've had enough asides. You know what I mean? Before we like go into a massive debate on argumentation ethics, let's just say for now that we agree to disagree, that I believe it is objectively true philosophically, and that it cannot be argued against that you use aggression and coercion against another person. And you believe that it is okay to force people via aggression. You believe that it is a morally justified position so long as the outcomes are favorable to the most amount of people or et cetera. You could reframe it. I'm not actually trying to straw man you here.
So if it was the case, can I just ask you a hypothetical? If it was the case that it was 1 penny, right? Stealing 1 penny would save the entire world from nuclear destruction. Would you think it's morally justified to steal that penny?
It's not morally justified to steal a penny to save the world. No, it's not morally justified. I understand that you want to bring that. So my question is, like,
Stop, hold on.
No. We're not stopping.
I let you go for a while. I give you one hypothetical.
No.
Yeah. Just for a second, right? You went for a while. I'm trying to have equal airtime when you did.
If you're going to posit that, then will you at least admit, will you answer, like you reframe the trolley problem into save a penny to steal a penny to save the world, but we can just as easily disingenuously do this. How long are you willing to rape a child to save the world?
I don't think it's worth raping a child to save the world, because the kind of disposition that would give you would likely not be the kind of thing that would save the world, right? If you're saying that there are like if you're saying there are analogous things, right, that are like seemingly morally wrong actions to do, things where you violate somebody's consent or violate somebody's will or something like that, I think those are worth doing as long as they're utility maximizing. I don't think this case would be, right? I think the issue is no matter how bad the damage is, you raping a child causes a disposition which would cause you to be a sufficiently bad person such that you would not save the world, right?
So it doesn't actually matter. So you wouldn't commit an evil act in order to save the entirety of the world.
I think it, by definition, if you were to commit an act that's sufficiently evil, the disposition that would cause you to have would cause you to not be able to save the world, right? It's just the case that, like,
okay, that's right.
If you're
so
saying,
you're saying eventually raping the child, you wouldn't want to save the world.
I'm saying
your
that
disposition would change. We're going to add quack psychology to this now.
I don't think it's quack psychology. I think your disposition would obviously change if you're raping kids. Do you disagree?
It's just more crystal ball, right? Is that like is now it's okay, I'm gonna run away from this by saying that if I raped a child to save the world, I would eventually no longer want to save the world.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I just don't think it's the case that raping kids will cause you to save the world, Fabian, right? I just don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I don't think it's a case that saving a penny will cause you to save the fucking world.
I think the taxes certainly do, right? So I think that if it's the case that we're willing, right, to violate somebody's consent, right? If it's the case that on particular cases, right, that's the differences you're going to have here, right? Like, just we think that there are particular cases that are bullet bitey for both positions. That's fine to think. I think there are bullet bites for utilitarianism. I don't think that's one of them. I can give you examples of them that I do think are bullet bitey, right? Like, would it be the case that I'd like kill one person, right, to stop 10 from dying naturally of cancer, right? That's bullet bitey, and I think you should do that. I think you should kill one person to stop 10 from dying of cancer. In the case of bullet bites, though, these are meaningless, right, at the end of the day, unless we can give arguments for why one position is worth doing in spite of this. If we have unintuitive situations, it's likely we'll come to unintuitive conclusions from any moral system. If it's the case that you're saying, right, in the case of utilitarianism, there's some bullets out there, and in the case of your system, there's also bullets out there, that puts us on equal footing, right? What really matters at the end of the day is not the bullets being bit, right, but what kind of meta-ethical arguments we can give for both positions. In the case of mine, the arguments I can give are from what we have impartial reason to do, which is how we treat morals, right? And what you have over here is a seemingly arbitrary position, right? It's just, you just think that it's wrong to violate people's consent no matter what the consent is.
Yeah. But I mean, like, again, it doesn't really deal much with gun control, but I mean, you kind of already bit the bullet of utilizing the steal a penny to save the world as a means of establishing norms, right? So it's not really about stealing a penny to save the world. It's about justifying a norm of stealing a penny to save the world. And then as you play that out, you're okay with mass levels of taxation and theft from people as a means of saving the world. And of course, where does that eventually lead us? Well, that eventually leads us to the justification of that theft, which can be utilized for all sorts of other new and wonderful uses. So I don't feel like I really need to go too into depth in that, because you kind of already bit the bullet that, you know, that isn't really about stealing a penny to save the world. But you ran away from the idea of the disposition and psychology would change. I don't think it's a bullet to bite. I have no idea why that's even an issue for the position. Obviously, when I talk about a hypothetical, I'm going to relate it back to the real world. I'm saying that here are some situations, right, that we can use the particular cases to see. Your particular case is not, or sorry, your intuitions don't comply with the system. I think there are areas where intuitions don't comply with utilitarianism either. But the point of bringing up the penny to save the world is just to show that, right? It's just to show there are particular cases that clash with the system, right? That puts us on equal footing if it's the case that we have the same number of particular intuitions that clash with the systems that get the systems given. I think that's probably not the case, but I'm fine with just granting it for the sake of the argument, right? Yeah, I'm not grounding my shit in intuitions. Like, it's you are. If you have beliefs and intuitions,
well, obviously you have to ground
analysis of like what you think is better.
Yeah, can you just escape Munchausen's trilemma? Do you just not have something that grounds your system out? Again, I don't want this to be a fucking philosophy debate against consequentialism, but like, you already know that there is at the very least that there is an objective framework by which we say that things are morally unjustifiable. Right? Now, not under ANCAP ethics. What you guys have is argumentation ethics, right? Which is a completely non-formalizable argument that you guys give that is just logically incoherent.
It's not logically incoherent.
What you guys will say is What you guys say is the fact that you are engaging in an argument with me. This is the ANCAP argument. The fact that you're engaging in an argument with me means necessarily you think that we should presuppose the norm, right? That it is better to negotiate than it is to use violent force, because you're not engaging in violent force right now. There's no reason why me saying that, like, why I'm presupposing the norm universally. I could just be presupposing it at this time, right? I could just say right now it's the most convenient thing to do, and in other cases it would be better if I were to use violent force.
Yeah, that's not what a norm is, and that's like that's just not what a norm is. You're saying I don't need to establish a norm; I can just do whatever I want, and I can argue, but I'm making propositional statements that have to be true, and you have to assume that norm in order for those statements to be true.
Propositional statements don't have to be true; they just have to be truth apt.
Well, and
they can be false.
They have to be okay, yeah, right. But if they're false, then I can dismiss them. Like if a statement is false, then it doesn't matter. It's not true. So therefore, what you're saying is false.
Statements being false can sometimes matter a lot, right? And then the negation of a false statement will be a true statement, right? So that would matter. So if the argument you're giving here is just like I'm making propositions, that's fine to do. By engaging in an argument with you, I'm not making the proposition that it's always better to engage in arguments with you. There are plenty of times when I'm not going to be engaging with an argument with you, right? And the same is true, right, for you choosing an argument above an act of force. Even though it's more preferable right now, even though it's better right now, right? It's not the case that it's better across the board. There are some cases where clearly me using force would be more preferable, be better on aggregate for everyone overall than it would to engage in an argument, right? You're not going to like argue Hitler out of doing the Holocaust or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't actually pertain to argumentation ethics. You're just engaging in your own kind of philosophical positions in terms of utilitarianism and then trying to add it to your interpretation of AE. I'm not really sure why you want to go into an AE debate right now. Like I gave you that we have a disagreement about this.
That's the core of why we have a disagreement about guns.
Okay, so I guess we're not going to have a debate about guns. Instead, we're going to have a debate about
guns. You don't have the data, right? So I sent you the data, right? It wouldn't be fair to cause you to ask you to read through the entirety of the sources right now.
No,
right?
you ran away from the position that I have on the way that
said you wanted to move on
in that. Again,
we talked about nuclear weapons for a bit, right? That was a side tangent. The core of the argument here, right, is our ethical differences, right? You don't think it would be justified, right, if I was to force somebody to not be able to transact a gun, right, to not be able to buy a gun, to not be able to sell a gun. You think that, in principle, right, is immoral to do. It would be immoral for me to force somebody to not be able to transact that. That is the core of our disagreement, which is why I'm asking you to justify your ethic, right? Why is your ethic worth following?
All right, so Andrew, if you want to retitle this as Argumentation Ethics Part 2 because he lost to Liquid Zulu, we can go now into argumentation ethics because we can't have a debate about gun control. Well, so now I have to defend the entire philosophy of anarcho-capitalism. Yeah. So let's go, I guess.
Hang on. I'm trying to be fair here. As as you guys both know, I take notes as we go. And what Sinthe seems to be alluding to here is that the reason why you believe X is because of this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a fair line of inquiry, because if we're talking about guns and gun control, that is a moral proposition, and he is asking specifically why it is that you think that everybody should be able to have a nuke, basically, and kind of exploring that. And I do think that's why I haven't really cut in to bring it.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to get into that. I'm just saying, like, let's go to this entirely new thing. So when you are arguing against me, right? You say that I'm not establishing a norm, that the observer doesn't establish a norm. You simply just deny that. If you're denying that a norm is being established via argumentation, you're saying that I'm not engaging in any of that, then I don't understand what you are doing via argumentation. You're not engaged in argumentation at that point. What you're doing is you might as well just be sitting there going glibble glabble globble globble glibble globble gum, right? Because you're not engaged in a behavior that is a search for the truth, or a search of recognizing that the other person has that their own ability to make propositional statements, and that they are themselves exercising control over scarce resources. That is what you're already establishing that norm via argumentation. And the reason that you're establishing that norm is that there are scarce resources, which is the time that the person has, the ideas, the brain power that they have, as well as private property, or property such as drinking water, in elongated argumentation. These are the things that you're establishing by by act of doing this. So I don't understand how you're saying I'm not establishing that norm because I say so, because that's not the argument. That's a straw man of the argument.
So there's no reason why, by virtue of me arguing with you, I'm presupposing you have self-ownership. There are plenty of cases where somebody might argue with their slave, right? They might argue with their slave or something, and they might whip the slave afterwards. It's awful to do, right? It's an awful society to live in, but it's certainly something that happened. Argumentation has nothing to do with me if I think you have ownership over yourself, or if I think ownership over you is by something else, right? That's irrelevant to the question. The idea that also, it would also mean that you have ownership over other things is just a wild tangent. So when I'm arguing with you, my
It's
goal
not a wild
in the
tangent. It's part of
argument,
AE, to
when
be
I'm-
fair.
So when I'm arguing with you, right, it's also not part of Hoppa's AE, right? So maybe some other AE or something. But if I'm
That's
arguing
not
with
true.
you, if I'm arguing with you, just a second, if I'm in the process of arguing with you, my goal in the argument is not to gain more information from you in particular, right? My goal is because I think there's something worth being told. I think I'm going to give you information. I think I'm going to give the audience information, right? If I'm arguing with you, it's because I think my position's correct, right? It's because I think I have information that you don't. I'm trying to deliver information to people that'll change their behaviors, right? I'm trying to make sure that they have more true beliefs, right? So if that's the goal of an argument, then I don't see any reason why me having that goal must also mean that any voluntary transaction is immoral, or any voluntary transaction being prevented by force is immoral. There's no way that follows to that, right? It's just a complete non sequitur.
Okay, so you can't argue with your slave, right? If you argue with your slave, then you are indeed, like, you can dictate to a slave. You can intimidate a slave, right? You can make commands of a slave, right? But if you are engaged in argumentation with a slave, right, you are attempting to change their behavior, as you put it, right? You're attempting to get them to realize a truth that you believe that you don't think that they believe, and you want them to accept that truth. Then what you are doing is you are establishing the norm that this slave, this person that you're dictating to, that you're hoping gains some knowledge themselves, is an individual that is exerting control over their body, and that they have exclusive control over what it is that they believe to be true and who they are, and exclusive control over those resources. So the very nature of actually engaging in argumentation sets up the norm that this person is different and that they have exclusive control over their own resources, over their own mind, and by extension, as we follow AE's logic forward, by their body and by private property, that on a first come, first user basis, which is a quote, by the way, from Hoppe in his Argumentation Ethics. First user, I'm sorry, hold on, let me actually get the quote exactly true. First user, first owner quote, right? So saying that that's not Hoppe's position is just a lie, unless you believe that lies require intent and you haven't read any of Hoppe's works on argumentation ethics.
So this is a series of tangents and logical leaps, none of which actually follow from the last one. There's no reason why, because of the fact that I'm trying to convince you of a truth, that means that I think you have exclusive control over what you believe. I think that you have subconscious control over your belief as well, right? I think that sometimes there are things that you believe through no fault of your own, right? I think this people have, like, there's some degree through which we have, like, what's called doxastic voluntarism in philosophy, which just means, like, beliefs are voluntary. Beliefs are things you choose. And there's some degree to which they aren't choices, some degree to which you have no choice over things. I could not right now choose to make myself believe that the world was not real. No matter how hard I tried to doubt that, I would still naturally believe this. I could not choose to become schizophrenic in my beliefs, or choose, right, to have some of these, like, more fundamental delusions. People have natural what's like systems of seemings, right? Systems of intuitions that they can't pass over, that they can't undermine, right? And so I don't think it's the case that any part of me trying to deliver a truth to you means you have exclusive control over your beliefs. I think that it's the case that also your genes have some control over your beliefs, right? If it's the case that you were, like, you had squirrel genes or something, you'd have the belief that you should be collecting nuts. There's no reason, right, why any active argumentation at all shows any kind of exclusivity over anything, including your beliefs.
Yeah, so there's not, unless you believe that God is the one that is really in control and you're arguing against God, I don't really understand what bringing up genes or bringing up subconscious has to do with anything, because it doesn't change exclusive control. What it changes is, like, the premise is that you have some control. You are capable of reasoning. You are capable of making propositional statements. That doesn't mean that people aren't crazy sometimes, right? And if they're crazy enough, then they actually don't have that control and they need to be committed, right? But they need help so that they can regain that control. But if I had squirrel genes, but I was still capable of making those choices, it wouldn't matter that there are subconscious influences on whether or not I choose one thing or another, because those subconscious influences would still be me. That is still who I am. That would still be me exerting control. You can't use genetics or environmental factors as a means of saying that individuals aren't capable of reasoning and arriving at a conclusion of truth, and to say that you're invalidating that.
Never.
Please explain.
Capable of reasoning, right? That's nothing to do with the argument. What I'm saying is that you don't have exclusive control over your beliefs, not that you don't have any control over your beliefs.
So who has
if
control?
If it was the case that I lobotomized you, right? You would have different beliefs. Agreed. Your audio's out, Andrew.
Yeah, I was saying
that doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
There's no great time to cut in, but we have to wind the debate down. We have callers stacked up, and we have super chats stacked up. So we're gonna let you guys wind it down for about the next 5 minutes, but then we need to get into closing statements. Fabian, we'll start back with you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So exclusive control doesn't mean that your active choices in your consciousness exert all control. What it means is that you have exclusive control. I never made the argument that there isn't a subconscious that is also you, that there isn't genetics that are also you, that there aren't environmental factors that limit choice, right? Like a hurricane isn't exerting control over you. It's just an environmental factor. So what I would say, yeah, like I'll let you respond to that. I'm sorry, before going on.
You're in your closing statement. You can speak as long as you want.
We said 5 minutes to wind it down. Is this closing statements?
You guys still got a little bit of back and forth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Please go.
Yeah, sure. So no, the fact that there is the fact that there are things that can control your behavior in terms of your beliefs, specifically from other people, like for example the example of lobotomy, right? If I lobotomize you, you would have a different set of beliefs. This means that necessarily, right, it is the case that other people have some degree of control over your belief. If a doctor lobotomized you, your beliefs would be different. If it was the case that a doctor removed your eyes, you would never have any beliefs about what red looks like, right? You wouldn't have any beliefs about that. So there are some beliefs, right, that are outside of your control. These beliefs can be influenced by biological factors, and those biological factors can be influenced by someone else. And so fundamentally, you don't have exclusive control, right? You have a lot of control. I believe that people have a lot of control over what they believe and what they think, but they don't have exclusive control. There are some things that you don't have any control over your belief in.
Yeah. So like I said, someone that is crazy, right, or someone that has been lobotomized is not someone that has I mean, I guess it depends on how bad the lobotomy is, as to whether or not they have whether or not they need a guardian present over them. But all of the examples that you gave of another person exerting control is an act of aggression, which is the very thing that argumentation ethics argues against, right? Like forcibly lobotomizing somebody or taking someone's eyes out that change what it is that person thinks or believes are the very acts of aggression of which argumentation ethics is saying that you don't have a right to do. So it's not an argument against exclusive control.
No, it certainly would be, right? So argumentation ethics is saying you are presupposing the NAP by virtue of arguing. And what I'm telling you is no, it's not in fact the case, because of the fact that, like, despite the fact that I'm arguing with you, there are other means I could take through which to change your beliefs, right? And I'm choosing this one because it's the most desirable right now. If it was the case that the only way to stop you, right, from the only way to stop you from going on a mass killing spree or something was to press a button that like lasered your eyes shut or whatever, right? Like it would be worth doing. It's not the case.
Yeah, that's not against the non-aggression principle.
It's not. I'm saying it's in advance, right? We're doing this in advance. That would be not retaliatory. This would be an advanced action because I'm expecting something, which would be against the non-aggression principle. If it's the case, right?
But okay.
It was in the case of nuclear weapons. I don't know why I wouldn't be here. So
we've got to cut it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Or we won't be able to get to our callers. We won't be able to get to all the supers. I'm sorry. There's never a good time to do it. You guys both know that. But,
yeah, of course.
Somewhere. Fabian, you opened Sinthe. I'm going to let you close first and then move over to Fabian. Go ahead.
Sure. So overall, we went over kind of like briefly the data on guns. Fabian made some claims about the kind of data that didn't exist, right? I gave him that exact type of data. Fabian doesn't have the time to read that, which is fair. In the case of the in the case of the second portion of the debate, it was mostly about like the extremes, the logical conclusions of the arguments about guns. They were things like the nuclear weapons, right? If it's the case that you can own guns, right, then why isn't it the case that you can own nuclear weapons? In the case of Fabian, he just bit the bullet and said, yes, you just can own nuclear weapons. It's just okay to do. And then the third portion of this debate was the core of it, the real core of the debate, I think, which is just the ethical reasons why Fabian doesn't think that it would ever be justified to stop somebody, right, by force, right, to be clear, to stop somebody by force from being able to transact anything voluntarily, right? This includes weapons. If it's the case, right, that his argument is just fundamentally based on argumentation ethics, then there's just no real grounding to it. I think that was clear. I think that most of the reasons you're going to give in favor of argumentation ethics will be fundamentally circular, or they're going to be fundamentally non sequiturs and logical leaps. And I don't think that there was a good reason given why we should hold to the position that no matter what, right, there's an objective moral truth that you should not violate somebody's that you shouldn't violate somebody's ability to engage in a voluntary contract.
Go ahead, Fabian.
Yeah, I think what we've discovered is a kind of throughout this debate, it's kind of fun to have these. I think what we saw is that Sinthe's philosophy is really just based off of his own kind of subjective math in how he thinks things will go in this crystal ball rubbing future. And he thinks that it's reasonable to claim through percentages that an action is right so long as it comes out to the right things. And, I think we've seen shit like this before. It's called Lysenkoism, right? Where we just kind of use data and science to murder a bunch of people and we say it's okay because reasons. And I think this is the better version of that. We talk about gun data and he says, well, it's fair that like he doesn't have a chance to go through the 50 pages that he gave him. Yeah, that's fair. But I mean, I still have a critique about the idea of social science using these models of establishing historical facts as somehow a means of establishing something as true empirically, when it's just, there's too many variables. It's not really an accurate way of doing things. Maybe if I go through that specific study, which I will, maybe I'm wrong there, right? Like maybe it's up to my kind of standards in terms of isolating variables in such a way. And maybe I'm just being a dick on that one. So we moved from that. We went to nukes, right? And, in the nukes, he can't substantiate any of his claims. He says, it is reasonable because schizophrenia, right? Not any, let's look at this one specific thing as if my system advocates that schizophrenics would have access to nuclear weapons. We didn't actually get into how market-based systems regulate. He's just assuming that regulation, is like a government thing and that there aren't voluntary forms of regulation through the market and insurance and things like that. But regardless of all of that, he says, well, less actors must mean it necessarily follows that there's less of a chance of nuclear war. But it's very easy to imagine a scenario where only two nation states have nuclear weapons. And because only two states have nuclear weapons, that for whatever reason, they decide to go at nuclear war and everyone else be damned. It's a very common, I don't know how true it is, but a very common right-wing argument, for example, that mutually assured destruction and giving more people access to nuclear weapons could actually result in less nuclear war. Now, I don't know who's right, and Sinthe doesn't know who's right either on that. He just kind of makes the claim that it's right, and when you call him out on that, he just kind of runs around and pivots. But eventually we get to argumentation ethics. And so he attacks argumentation ethics and says, this is the real crux of the thing. This is why you believe that it's not morally justifiable to limit people's voluntary transactions. And he's right. It is fundamentally argumentation ethics that has fully convinced me of some of the strongest libertarian positions. He attacks argumentation ethics by saying, well, I'm not establishing a norm because I say so. And then I explain that's not what you're doing. I'm talking about you're literally engaging in establishing a norm by your behavior, not by your opinions that go into this. And he goes, but I could be a salesman. I could be a fraudster, and I could be dictating to a slave. And again, none of those are actually argumentation. So unless Sinthe is willing to admit that he's never had a good faith debate in his entire life, and he's never been anything other than a salesman and a fraudster, then you do have to admit that he did engage in establishing the norm of argumentation. But see, you don't actually have exclusive control because you could have squirrel genes, right? And those squirrel genes could create a subconscious, and that subconscious could mean that your DNA doesn't actually affect who you are, and those squirrel genes don't make you who you are. But You know, I've seen a lot of crazy people on Twitch that like butt plugs with tails that claim to be squirrel people. But if anybody really did have a squirrel tail, I would still say, are you capable of making propositional statements? And are you capable of reasoning skills? And if so, they deserve those rights. I would even, scarily enough, give those rights to artificial intelligence if they legitimately have the ability of engaging in reason and they have a body of which they exert exclusive control over. And it is through this process, right? And I'm sorry, he gave one more attack. He said, see, you don't have exclusive control because I could use aggression and lobotomize you and it would change who you are as a person. And therefore you'd have different opinions. Therefore you don't have exclusive control. Congratulations. You attacked the justification for the non-aggression principle with aggression over and over again. What a nonsensical answer that is. So again, as we go through argumentation ethics, when an individual has that exclusive control and you recognize that as an individual, that is the only way to justify claims now is that you're recognizing the exclusive control that someone has over their body. Without this exclusive control, one would logically need to get the consent of latecomers for all property, right? Because in order for me to drink, in order for me to eat food, in order for me to engage in things that require extended argumentation, I have to live, I have to breathe. And in order for me to justify, now that we've recognized that people have exclusive control over themselves and that they homestead property, if homesteading property and private property is not real, but instead the communist idea that property is kind of this nebulous thing that we all have a right to, well then, in order for me to drink this glass of water and justify my moral claims, I would need to get permission of every single solitary person that could ever in the future of the world and ever in the past and ever could come and have some property claim to this water in order to do it. It would be nonsensical. It would be impossible. And so by recognizing the exclusive control of our body and by recognizing the exclusive control of private property, we come to the point that you must inherently make all propositional claims within the non-aggression principle. You don't get to use violence and coercion based off of your own personal beliefs against people. Now, if someone's raising a gun to your head or a crazy schizophrenic has a nuclear warhead and is, experimenting with nuclear bombs in their basement, well, that's the same thing. That's a threat of violence. If some wacko has fucking anthrax in his basement that he's experimenting with in a neighborhood that's populated and he's not taking proper safety precautions, that's a threat against humanity. Again, that is an act of aggression. It's no different than me coming up to you and putting a gun to your head and saying, will I pull the trigger? Won't I pull the trigger? Have a nice day, motherfucker, right? If someone does that, you have every right to defend yourself. And so that is the position, I would say, of a 1,000-foot view of the moral reason why I think that you don't get to take guns away from people. Because I want people to defend themselves. I want people to be able to fight back against a tyrannical government. I want people to be able to engage in the non-aggression principle, but when there are aggressors, they need that force multiplier in order to adequately defend themselves. It is a fundamental violation of human rights to take away their ability to protect and defend themselves, because aggressors do exist and they might want to lobotomize you so that they can make sure that we have less nuclear warheads. I don't know, but I need my guns for that.
Thank you so much for that closing argument, Fabian. I did want you to see that Redfish Bear did send in a sizable donation to throw tomatoes at Sinthe.
Those tomatoes. Okay, I was wondering what the hell that was.
Those are tomatoes, and he did throw them specifically at Sinthe's face.
No.
Oh, yes.
No, that's bullshit. That's bullshit.
It is. I mean,
that's bullshit.
I don't know. I got some tomatoes for you too,
Fabian.
Fabian.
Sinthe has done nothing but argue his positions and his claims. Sometimes I think they were bad faith. He probably thinks the same thing about me. But whoever this person is has not been aggressed upon. What they have done and said is gotten peak content from the in-house leftist debater. And instead, I think, I think that it's absolutely ridiculous to throw tomatoes at him. That'd be an act of aggression, and I disavow.
He disavows. I did see that we need a fully automatic tomato thrower. I heard that in chat. Also, let's get some exclusive tomato emojis so that we know which one to throw them at. Maybe we got to do that too. Anyway, gentlemen, Thank you for the spirited debate. I've got to get to the callers now. The first caller.
You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.